Alright, we are back with a new video, and to wrap up my coverage of BB Can 10, I'll be doing a player ranking of how I feel all these players played on this season, and oh boy. So as I alluded to in my review, this season had a lot of not great players, but players that were willing to play the game at points, and obviously that led to the season being as interesting as it was. But now it's time to sort of get back into the mindset of analyzing this a bit more objectively and just seeing how they played across this season, regardless of what their chances of winning the game were. So there are 16 players to rank here, and let's just get right into the list. So starting off at number 16, the player I think played the worst game on BB Can 10 is the first boot of the season. We have Melina, and admittedly, there isn't much to say about Melina. I mean, obviously, a lot of that first week was not captured on the feeds. A lot of what we know from that week was like summed up in the one episode, as well as stuff we've heard from after the season. And from what we could gather, I mean, Melina didn't play particularly great. While she didn't seem to be that actively bad, she always seemed like someone that was primed to be taken out relatively early. Didn't really build that many connections in the house. And obviously, it's not too surprising to see her be a first boot here. Now, to be fair, again, I did consider putting her a little bit higher, again, as we don't know the entire story of what happened. But again, the stuff that we do know isn't that great. And she is the first boot at the end of the day, and I'm not too sure how well she would have done regardless. So because of that, I have her here at number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we have another pretty passive player, although one that we know a little bit more about, and one that made it a bit further in the game. And here we have Stephanie, aka the victim of the Kyle HOH. And admittedly, I did consider putting a couple people below her, but I feel like at the end of the day, Stephanie was a very passive player and didn't really have much agency throughout a lot of the game. And obviously we see that through her game where, yes, she was technically in the retreat at one point, but aside from that, she didn't really have that many allies in the game. I mean, even Kyle, yes, while we fault Kyle for putting her up as she was technically one of his allies, she was far from his closest ally at that point, and she didn't really have anyone else either. So on paper, at least, you'd think that getting rid of her isn't the worst thing in the world. And even before the Kyle HOH, yes, while she gets unlucky in that she wasn't the target from that week and was put up due to weird circumstances, she was also supposed to be targeted week 2, and obviously, a lot of people are thinking of targeting her, including Marty, who won that HOH. And the only reason that Marty didn't put her up was because of a deal they made during the HOH comp where he agreed to not put her up. And that was pretty much the only reason Marty didn't put her up, where he literally told people after winning the HOH that he wanted to put her up, but didn't because he didn't want to go back on his deal. So I guess you could give her a little bit of credit for that. But even then, it is Marty at the end of the day. So, and plus, she is the third boot of the season. And yes, you do fault her a bit for being the third boot of the season. She wasn't even supposed to go home during the Kyle HOH, but she went out largely due to the house being completely against Kyle at that point. So there's that. But even if she survived those weeks, I don't think she really would have had much agency moving forward. And I feel like regardless, she probably could have been an easy boot in a later week. So at the end of the day, I don't really see her going too much higher in this list, and she's here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we're going back a little bit to the second boot of the season, and here we have Jay. And I did consider putting Jay a little bit higher as well, considering the work that they did during their last week, and the fact that there were people that wanted to save them during the week they were up on the block. But even so, they are the second boot, and I feel like if you consider how they played before being in danger, I feel like they were very passive beforehand, where yes, they were good at building bonds and really connecting well with people, but none of that really translated to game. They weren't really in the core power structure, and obviously they were primed to be taken out pretty early there. Now again, I will give them some credit. Jay did some effective work in campaigning, and there was a point where it was possible they could have stayed during the week they were up on the block. It's just that by the end of the week, the numbers just weren't there anymore and they were out the door. So again, I did consider putting them a little bit higher because of that good work. But again, they were very passive in the first week. And at the end of the day, they were the second boot. I can't have them too high. And I feel like they fit sort of the previous two people which we were talking about, where, yes, despite them being more active, they were ultimately more passive in the game. And I feel like they sort of belong in that category of passive players that were also early boots. So, with all that in mind, I decided to have Jay here at number 14. Now, moving on to number 13, and you were probably seeing this one coming. Obviously, there's some people that think this person should be even lower than where they are here, but I decided to have them a little bit higher. But at number 13, we do have Kyle. And I mean, what is there to say about Kyle? He had probably the worst HOH of all time, not only in BB Can history, but arguably in BBUS history as well. Really blew up his game for seemingly no reason during his HOH. And it's sort of insane to see all that take place. I mean, again, I'm not defending the HOH at all. It is really bad. He came into that HOH in a very prime position, essentially in the center of the house. And again, he could have had a very easy week of putting up Betty or Jess or someone at the bottom and use that week to solidify their power structure, which again, they had a very strong position at that point. And granted, probably not with the original Savage 7, but certainly good enough to where they could have built something for themselves and really steamrolled from that point on with him and Gino in the center of the house. But obviously, he essentially gets a really bad case of HOH-itis and big move-itis and decides that he can't go for the easy move. And obviously, that leads him to put up Moose and Stephanie, which obviously blows up his position because they were both his allies. And in fact, he even had an out-of-the-game relationship with Moose, so that's another thing to consider. Moose obviously wins veto and is completely against him from that point on. And then from that point, he decides to target Josh. And obviously, he has Stephanie still on the block as his pawn, really pushes for the Josh boot. But obviously, we see the house turn on him basically because of how poorly he handled the HOH. And obviously, they evict Stephanie in his place while leaving Josh in the house, someone that he had actively targeted and someone that had no reason to work with him moving forward. But even after that, obviously, I mean, he could have gotten saved there with Gino winning the next HOH. And obviously, Gino initially wanted to save him until he got manipulated by the rest of the house into backdooring him, thinking that like taking out a wide house target would ultimately improve Gino's position, even though it really doesn't. But we'll get into that later. So obviously, it was a pretty dramatic exit as well. Again, being backdoored by his own ally, despite that not being in his best interest. Again, all that's really bad. His HOH and obviously the Gino week is very bad for him, and a big reason that he is this on the list. However, the reason I have him like not at the bottom is because of how he handled the first 2 weeks. I mean, he did very good work in the first 2 weeks, really positioning himself in the middle of the house where, yes, as I mentioned earlier, he wasn't in the core of the Savage 7, the power structure that Herman had built. And obviously that's not great. Like he recognized that, like he needed to do stuff around Herman in order to build something for himself. And I feel like he was definitely on track to do so. And had he handled his HOH properly or not screwed it up as badly as he did, there is a chance that he could have built his own power structure and really dominate the rest of the season. And the fact that he was in that position to begin with is something to be commended and a big reason that he is this high on the list, especially when he's the more active player between him and Gino. So that's something else to consider as well. But at the end of the day, he did blow up his game. He did get that really bad case of HOH-itis. And even after that, he, again, was backdoored by his own ally. So, again, all that's really bad. But it's the work that he did in the first 2 weeks that makes me put him a bit higher, and he's here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and we have someone who made it a bit further in the game than Kyle. And while they didn't have as big of a downfall as Kyle did, they weren't in that great of a position for most of the game. And here we have Jess. And again, unlike Kyle, Jess was not in a strong position for most of the game. They were on the block week 1 and probably would have been the target had they not won the veto. So that's not particularly great. And from that point on, I mean, they aren't really in the core of things. I mean, yes, they are kind of in it with Kevin and Helena, but even then, they aren't that loyal to Jess at the end of the day. Obviously, they are at the bottom for a lot of the game, having to win competitions. And then obviously they end up winning HOH, where Jess should be in a position to, again, build a power structure, considering this is a point in the season where there really wasn't much of a power structure, largely because of Kyle blowing everything up and Gino not really doing much for himself. Again, Jess was definitely in a position to do so, and they kind of do, but they end up making the wrong mistake in targeting Tanisha, someone that is perceived to be a big player, despite them not really being a big player. But obviously, they do this under the idea that Kevin and Helena are going to be a power structure for them moving forward. But obviously, Kevin and Helena ultimately do not end up working with them moving forward, fails to secure their loyalty, and again, votes out Tanisha, someone that doesn't really benefit Jess's game. And then obviously we get to the double eviction where they were pretty much the consensus target from that point on. I mean, they really needed to win that safety comp in order to ensure their safety moving forward. And to their credit, they did have a chance of winning that comp, as crazy as it seems. I mean, had they not put the wrong ball into the tube, there is a decent chance that Jess wins that safety comp and gets through that round where, again, they were a consensus target, but obviously they are unable to do so and are quickly voted out. So again, it's a very rocky game and not particularly good one, if you ask me. I mean, obviously they were in danger for quite a bit of their run, and while they did have an opportunity to flip things around with their HOH, they are ultimately ineffective at doing so, making themselves a consensus target moving forward, and obviously they are taken out soon after. So again, very rocky game, but they do make it a bit further than the people we already talked about, which is more than I can say than those people. And again, a big reason I have Jess here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11. We have someone who I just mentioned, and it's actually the final pre-juror left to talk about. And here we have Tanisha. And I feel like Tanisha's game is pretty similar to Summer's. Again, we'll talk about Summer in a bit. Again, she was obviously closely aligned to Summer and was working alongside her. However, she was definitely the more passive player between the two. And obviously, over time, that passivity is really what does her in, where she develops this reputation of being a big player. I mean, largely because she doesn't talk game with anyone. It's sort of weird because she definitely talks to a lot of people and builds a lot of social bonds, but because she never talks game with everyone, that leads everyone to think that she's talking to everyone else about game and not talking about them, making them think that she's a big player, but not one that is loyal to them. And obviously that paints a big target on her back, and obviously one that is so big that she is not good enough as a player to really navigate around that. So obviously that is a knock there. And again, she is a largely passive player. However, I feel like she has fewer low points than the people we already talked about. Again, she does make it decently further than the people we already talked about. And even people like Kyle and Jess, she doesn't have as many bumpy roads than them. It's just through her being a very passive player that causes her to get this perception that, again, you can question whether or not it's warranted, but it's obviously one that puts her in a very tough position and obviously explains why she's evicted during the Jess HOH. So obviously it's not a great game, but again, I don't think she makes as many mistakes as someone like a Kyle or a Jess. And again, she makes it further than the very early boots. So because of that, I have her here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10. And from this point on the list, we're talking about people that made it to the jury phase of the game. And at number 10, we have probably the most confusing player to talk about, and obviously someone who had a very rocky game. But at number 10, we do have Moose. And Moose is a very interesting person to talk about because he is someone that plays very actively early on. I mean, we see him like moving around, trying to make himself be this big player. And while he is somewhat effective early on as getting into this core with Kyle and Gino, obviously by week 2 and week 3, he's starting to be distrusted. We see people like Kyle start to distance himself from Moose, and even people like Herman don't seem to trust him that much. And obviously gets to the point where he is sort of pushed out of the core alliance of the Savage 7 in favor of Marty. So that's not particularly great. Kyle wins HOH week 3 and decides to target Moose. You know, like despite that, again, not really being in his best interest. I mean, we see Moose like trying to calm Stephanie down, and obviously that gives Kyle the justification to put Moose up on the block. So, and again, that's a very rocky spot for Moose, but obviously he's able to win the veto. And from that point on, I mean, the Kyle HOH plays out as we saw in the show. And then moving forward, I mean, yes, he is sort of floating around, but again, he's not really in the core of things. I mean, he is sort of kind of in the Herman side of things, but also someone that doesn't really have much control and is seen as this really big threat where we do hear people talking about targeting moving forward. And I feel like that is a big problem with this game, is that I feel like he would have needed to win out to get to the end of the game. The fact that he wins the safety chain comp to start the safety chain was a very big moment for him, where I feel like if he didn't win that, there was a chance he could have been targeted over Jess, assuming Jess won safety. I feel like he would have been the second most likely person to be evicted there. And again, he essentially kind of has to win out, especially from the point where Herman is evicted. And there was a point where he could have been safe, especially with the plan to backdoor Marty. And even with JC Lynn getting a special veto that she could have used to help in that backdoor. But obviously that plan doesn't go through. They decide to not use the veto. And instead, Moose is left up on the block where, again, he pretty much had no chance from that point on and is evicted as a result. So again, it's a very rocky game and one in which I have trouble assessing because, yes, there are points where he's very active in the game, particularly early on, but it's also very not that great in the sense that he is being targeted and we see people not trusting him. And even the points where he's not being targeted, I mean, it doesn't seem like he's really in the core of things moving forward, especially once the power structure blows up during the Kyle HOH. And I feel like he is someone who probably could have won the game had it gone to the end. However, he would have needed to win out as he didn't really have many allies, especially by the time of his boot. He really needed to win out. And obviously, that's just something that would have been too tall of a task for him to do. So again, it's a very rocky game. There are some ups and downs, but I feel like all that levels out to him being here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have a player who's kind of similar to Moose in that he was very active at points, very messy at points. However, the main difference here is that he was in the core power structure for longer and definitely had more power within the game than Moose, but still pretty bad at points. And here we have Marty. And again, I feel like the main thing that separates Marty from Moose is that he did technically have more power throughout the game. He won 3 HOHs during the season, and there were points where he was in the core power structure. I mean, we see him in week 2 really get into the core alliance of Kyle and Gino, and had that alliance stuck together beyond the Kyle HOH, I feel like that definitely would have put Marty in a good position moving forward. But obviously the power structure blows up, and then from that point on, I mean, he technically is in the majority for a lot of it, but obviously someone who definitely rubs some people the wrong way. I mean, as I said, he ends up winning 3 HOHs over the course of the season. However, I feel like he doesn't handle any of them particularly well. I mean, we see during his first HOH, he tells people that he wanted to target Stephanie, but doesn't because of a deal he made with her during the HOH comp, where essentially she would allow him to win that. And of course, that ends up getting on some people's nerves where people are saying, well, why don't you just put up Stephanie? Who cares? But Marty presents himself as someone who is honest and is all about loyalty and integrity and someone that really cares a lot about what Canada thinks, which ironically makes people be more annoyed by him. So obviously that's an issue there. Again, obviously puts up Jay in a position where Jay could have gotten votes to stay, but obviously that doesn't go through. So that's not great. His second HOH, I mean, we see him come right after the double eviction where there was a plan to flip on Gino during the double, and he was looped into that plan. However, the plan ended up flipping back right before the vote happened, but he was not looped into the plan and ends up voting for Gino at the actual vote, wins HOH immediately afterwards, and instead of just owning up to the vote and trying to move forward and try not to make it too big of a deal, he decides to blame it all on Josh and Betty for putting the plan together and not telling him otherwise, making him seem like someone that is a liar and a deceiver to Canada, and he really dedicates that HOH to getting back at Josh and Betty. However, he is unsuccessful in getting out either of them. That's not particularly great. And then obviously there's his third HOH where, again, he is still on this tirade of wanting to go after Josh and Betty. And obviously we see him put him up only for Betty to win the veto. And it seemed like he was about to put Kevin on the block as a replacement. And it seemed like he was definitely on track to do so for a lot of the day until Kevin is able to manipulate him into saying that he's completely loyal to him and that they're committed to this 5-person alliance. And then obviously through that, he decides to use the gummy bears to replace the nominee. And obviously Gino draws it, which is funny in the sense that he literally backstabs Gino 3 times over the course of the season, with each time he's trying to get Gino's forgiveness, like thinking that if he does everything and bends over backwards to make it up to him, that Gino will somehow forgive him and be willing to do so, which, again, given it's Gino, I mean, probably, But obviously, it's pretty ironic that he is a core reason why Gino is eventually evicted, despite him spending so much of the season acting like he has to make it up to Gino. And Gino is someone that should be in his corner. So I find that very hilarious. And then by the time of the triple eviction shortly after, I mean, he's pretty much a goner. He pretty much needs to win out from that point in order to stay. But obviously, when he's unable to win either comp in the triple, he is promptly evicted. So again, it is a very, very messy game. And obviously, a lot of people were annoyed by Marty's self righteousness during the season. I mean, he was very much someone that preached on honor and integrity, despite him, again, backstabbing Gino 3 times over the course of the season and being kind of hypocritical at points. So that's not particularly great. But the reason I have him above Moose is, well, 2 reasons. One is that obviously he made it further into the game and probably would have won had he gotten to the end, similar to Moose. It was closer to doing so than Moose, given he did make it to the triple eviction. And then obviously the other reason is that, again, he just had more power in the game. And yes, while he does misplay that power on multiple points, he at least had the power to begin with, and there were more points where he was clearly in the majority, especially at the beginning of the game. So those are things I can at least give Marty, but it is such a messy, messy game that I can't have him too much higher, and he's here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have another interesting player to talk about. Not as actively bad as Marty or Moose, but was pretty passive for a lot of it and still made some mistakes along the way. But at number 8, we do have Gino. And Gino's an interesting case to talk about, as on one hand, he was decently positioned, at least at the beginning of the game, and even after the Kyle HOH, he was in a somewhat decent spot to where he wasn't going to be an immediate target, although there were still people that wanted him gone at a point. However, I think the biggest problem with Gino is that he was just very passive throughout a lot of the game. I mean, obviously, he is in a solid position early on, building relationships with a lot of the house, but most critically with Kyle. And he is able to get into the center of the house as a result, making him the most well-positioned player in there. However, he doesn't seem to be playing the game that actively. It just seems like a lot of people are just gravitating towards him more so than him actively building relationships and alliances with people. Is just a likable guy. And I feel like between him and Kyle is definitely the more active player in terms of them getting into that central position in the house, to where, again, if Kyle hadn't blown everything up, then the two of them would have benefited quite a bit from the game moving forward. But obviously we get to Kyle's HOH, where obviously he blows up the power structure, which obviously puts Gino in a bad position moving forward. And then obviously Gino wins HOH shortly after, where Kyle should have been safe from that point on, despite being a consensus target. And initially, Gino was willing to save Kyle here in order to keep him around, again, stick by his ally there. But then ultimately he senses that the house wants Kyle gone, and he fears that if Kyle sticks around, he'll be this target. He'll probably go up against Kyle, and as a result, if Kyle were to win the veto, he'd be targeted in turn, which prompts Gino to backdoor Kyle, sending him out. And I do think that is a bad move, as yes, I do understand where he's coming from, to where if Kyle were to win the veto, then Gino might be in a lot of danger. Except there's also the possibility that Kyle wins HOH moving forward, again, and assuming he doesn't blow everything up. I mean, that is someone that would always be by his side unless they were on the block against each other. But the other factor is that even taking that into account, I mean, Gino doesn't really do that much to keep himself off the block, as we hear people say that they want to target him moving forward. It really just shifts the potential target from him and Kyle on the block to, say, him and JC Lynn on the block. So even then, while he thinks he's doing the bidding in the house and really ingratiating himself there, Gino himself isn't really doing that much to get himself off the bottom moving forward. So that's not great. And moving forward, I mean, he's doing all right, but then again, he's not really doing that much to actively better his game. I mean, obviously we see Kevin and Helena, once that power structure starts to form, they come to him and JC Lynn with a Final Four deal, and obviously they're able to solidify something there. But even then, I mean, Gino is very clearly a big target to have in front of them. And then obviously as people like Herman and Marty start to get out of the game, Gino is starting to become more of a prominent threat moving forward. And then obviously we get to his relationship with Marty, which is very interesting. Obviously, there was almost a flip on him at the double eviction. He was left out of the safety chain, leaving him, JC, Lynn, and Jessica to compete in the safety comp. And obviously, had Jessica won that safety comp, which, to be fair, they almost did, Gino would have been voted out there. So obviously, that's a very bad spot for them. But the other thing is that even in the actual result where JC wins the safety comp, there was an attempted flip against Gino. And it seemed that there was at least a non-zero chance that that flip would have gone through, which again would have sent out Gino there. So obviously that's another very bad thing, something Gino probably wasn't even expecting. But obviously Marty is included in that the plan had already flipped back. They had sensed that him along with Betty were sort of backing off from it, which prompted the plan to not go through. But obviously that was a very real danger spot for Gino there. And then obviously we see Marty vote for Gino in the actual vote because he was included in that the flip wasn't going to happen. Marty wins HOH thereafter, and obviously Marty's very much committed to getting back in Gino's good graces after backstabbing him twice, and obviously that gives Gino some safety moving forward. But then literally we see Gino win HOH again, where he sees that Marty is this big threat, and he actually wants to backdoor Marty, which is not an ideal move for Gino to make, as Marty is a big threat to have ahead of him. And the flip almost happens. I mean, even though Helena, one of the few people that wouldn't use the veto on Marty or use the veto to get Marty up as a backdoor, wins the veto, we have JC Lynn winning a secret veto that also could have been used, giving Gino another opportunity to get what he wants. But obviously, JC decides not to use it. And again, I mean, Gino wanted to backdoor Marty, which was not a good move for him. And it's just through other people not using vetoes that were given to them that allowed Gino to come out of the week in a better position than he probably would have had he gotten what he wanted there. So even then, that's not a good HOH result for him. And then we get to Marty's third HOH, where he is again trying to get into Gino's good graces, trying to keep him safe. But then obviously we know what happens next, where again, Betty wins the veto. It seems like Kevin is going to be the replacement nominee until Kevin is able to convince Marty that it doesn't matter who is the replacement nominee, which leads us into the gummy bear draw, where Gino was even asked by Marty if he wanted to put his gummy bear in, and obviously he should have said no there. Now, again, I can see the argument that he should have said yes, as obviously saying no would have sketched out Marty. But considering Marty didn't want to put up Gino to begin with, and obviously this was largely a test to see Gino's allegiance to the Alliance, I can kind of see it. But at the end of the day, I mean, if he had said no, he would not have gone on the block that week. So there's that. Obviously, he puts his gummy bear in the draw. He draws the red gummy bear, making him the replacement nominee. And then Kevin orchestrates the flip against him. So on the whole, I mean, Gino's game is really weird to talk about because I think for a lot of it, he is pretty passive. I mean, again, I feel like people like Gino, people like Kyle, people like JC at points are playing the game more aggressively than him and helping him to get out of some sticky situations. And obviously he does get unlucky in that he draws the red gummy bear. Had that not happened, he would have gone into the triple in a position to where had he won that HOH and gotten to the final five, he would have only needed to win, 3 more comps in order to get to the end. And at that point, he would have been the clear favorite to win, really beating almost anyone. So I feel like that is a major boon to his game. However, he also got incredibly lucky during the double eviction where, again, there was almost a flip on him. Even outside that, I think he makes some pretty suboptimal moves, like, again, backdooring Kyle, thinking that would ingratiate himself when it really didn't. And obviously his move to backdoor Marty, which, again, he gets lucky that he doesn't actually get to enact it, but had he did, he would have been in a worse position as well. So again, it's a really lackluster game, but it's enough to land up here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have the earliest boot left in the game, but here we have Herman. And Herman is definitely one of the better players on this cast, and definitely someone who was less actively bad, but also someone that wasn't too passive in the game. And obviously, people have talked about this before, but he is obviously the closest representative to the BBUS style of game, where he very much wanted to play a game that is usually played on BBUS, where he wanted to build this power structure early on, consisting largely of the people that do well in competitions, and through that dominate the game. And to his credit, he did have some success in putting it together. He obviously wins for HOH, which is a little funny considering he literally said in his preseason bio that he didn't want to win the first HOH, and he just gets that through chance. And while we didn't see his HOH play out on the feeds, he came out of it with a power structure. He had the Savage 7, which, again, while having its flaws and having its cracks, was something that could have held together had certain comp results happened. And obviously, he very much was committed to making it work. However, the Kyle HOH just blew everything up. Now, obviously, Kyle winning HOH and playing it well probably wouldn't have been the ideal thing for Herman, as Kyle recognized that he wasn't the one benefiting the most from the Savage 7 and very much wanted to create a power structure that more benefited him and Gino, and obviously leave Herman out of it to a degree. But again, it just blew the game wide open. And obviously we see Herman spend a lot of the pre-jury phase trying to get it back together and having some success, but obviously doesn't get it completely. And obviously he's just unable to solidify things due to certain comp results. And obviously coming into the jury phase, he was a pretty massive threat to where he probably would have needed to win out in order to get to the end. And obviously Kevin just simply outplays him by the end of it, where he's able to get Herman out of the house, despite him being a bigger threat. And again, I feel like Herman played a mostly solid game. However, he is someone that, again, probably would have struggled on a season like this, a season in which people were not willing to play a BBUS style of game. I mean, these people are definitely more self-interested, more active than what he probably would have needed in order to have a solid power structure. And obviously, again, he doesn't have a ton of control throughout the game. However, he is definitely someone who played well enough and was, even during his boot week, he was able at a point to get a flip to happen to save him, but obviously the numbers just weren't there for it. However, I just feel like he is someone that has a lot of potential if he were to return. And heck, even if he played on a season of BBUS, he probably does pretty well there. So it's for those reasons that I decided to have him pretty high in the list considering his placement. But again, he is still the first juror. I can't have him too high. So he's here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have the other boot from the triple eviction, and here we have Summer. And Summer's interesting because there are definitely points where I feel like she was playing pretty well, especially early on, where she was someone that was well connected with most of the house. She was in the majority alliance, the Savage 7. She was alongside Tanisha, and she really had decent relationships with a lot of the house to where very few people were willing to target her early on. And obviously she had people that were probably going to be targeted over her, people like Tanisha, for example. But then obviously we have the Kyle HOH blowing up the Savage 7, and obviously from there on, like, she has to work around that. And to her credit, she is able to build some decent relationships and is able to sort of recover to a certain degree. She's able to stick along with Tanisha. But then we get to the Tanisha boot, where obviously she loses her closest ally. And from that point on, I feel like she is on the bottom for a lot of it. I mean, yes, while she does try to fix some certain things, I mean, she doesn't really do that much to get herself off the bottom. It really feels like the Kevin and Helena side of things are taking more control of the game. And obviously she starts to lose some of her relationships, people like Betty and even Josh, to where by the time of the triple eviction, like, she is shocked when Josh puts her up on the block over Kevin or Helena. And obviously we see that reaction from her. So that isn't ideal that she wasn't able to solidify that. I also haven't mentioned how during the Gino week, she very much gets saved by the public vote, where she obviously gets safety for the week through Canada's vote, where I feel like if it wasn't for that, she very likely would have been the replacement nominee. And obviously it's through her getting safety and just moving the replacement noms under other options that allowed the Gino week to play out. So sort of crazy how that led to a certain ripple effect. But obviously it's also knocking that she was technically saved by a twist there. And again, by the time of the triple eviction, we see Josh win HOH, putting her up on the block, and obviously she ends up going home there. Now, granted, she does get a bit unlucky in that Lynn wins the veto, where if it weren't for that, she probably stays over Marty and JC. So she does get a bit unlucky there. But even if she survives, I mean, I'm not really too sure what her end game is. Where obviously she wasn't that great in competitions, and actually that was a reason why someone like her mom was getting frustrated by her, was because she admitted throwing competitions, and obviously that got on Herman's nerves, as he needs people that can win competitions for a strategy to work. So there's that. And obviously with her being a bit of an outlier, she probably would have been targeted. And obviously with her not being that great in competitions, she probably would have been picked off as a result. So again, she does get unlucky with the triple, but she also gets lucky with the candidate's vote aspect. And obviously I don't feel like she would have been in a great position even if she survived the triple. But again, to her credit, she does win it. She gets to the end. I feel like that's a common theme with the last couple people we talked about. It's just that obviously those people were evicted before they had a chance to truly win out. So obviously, again, it is a bit of an up and down game, but obviously Summer came relatively close to getting into an endgame position, even though it wasn't particularly great. But obviously she had some moments of good gameplay, which is enough to leave her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and from this point on, we're all talking about people that made it to the end game, so that should be pretty interesting. But on number 5, we have the final juror of the season, and here we have Betty. And I did debate between putting Betty and this next person in terms of their placements, but I decided to have Betty a bit lower, as I felt like she was worse positioned throughout more of the game. She obviously has a very rough start where, again, she kind of is on the block for quite a bit, or if not on the block, as is at least talked about as being a potential option for a lot of the game. And I do have to give her a lot of credit. She does a lot of campaigning, both when she's on the block and even when she's not, to essentially keep herself out of danger. So I feel like that is something at least. However, she is obviously perceived as emotional for a lot of the game, which definitely harms her perception to a degree. And obviously she does align with the crash test dummies for a lot of the mid game, particularly with Josh, and obviously is able to ride that for a lot of the game as well. She's obviously able to get to the end game where she starts to win some comps, like she wins a veto, she obviously wins Final 5 HOH, and obviously it's through that where she learns about like the fact that Kevin and Helena are a duo and tries to break them up, only for the veto results to not work out that way. And obviously we see Kevin and Helena essentially having to make the decision to where it's either between JC or Josh. And obviously they end up keeping Josh, which again isn't what she wanted. Like she definitely wanted Lynn out for a lot of that week, but obviously keeping around Josh is something that benefits her endgame position, as we obviously later learn that Betty would have beaten Josh in a jury vote, or at least it would have been very, very close. It essentially would have come down to Canada's vote there. So obviously the fact that Betty could have won a jury vote is pretty impressive on her end. But obviously she most likely loses to Kevin, and I think she also loses to Lynn if that had gone through. So again, the fact that Lynn goes out at 5th is probably a better sign for her game. But then obviously at Final 4, like she isn't able to keep on to Josh, who at this point literally goes out of his way to keep around Kevin. Obviously evicts Helena in that position. And then at Final 3, she isn't able to keep Josh to keep her in the game, and he literally evicts her over Kevin, thinking that he would beat Kevin when obviously that isn't true. And again, it's a pretty rough game to assess there, not an overly oppressive game, but I think the biggest boon to her game is, well, one, I feel like there are points where she is playing actively and is able to get herself into a somewhat decent position, even though she isn't always effective and she isn't always dominant. However, I think the other big boon is the fact that she does beat Josh at the end, or if not, it's very, very close. And I feel like that is enough to have her this high on the list. However, I feel like the top 4 people either played more impressive games or people that possibly beat her in a jury vote. So it's for those reasons that I have her here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we have the lowest placed person left on the board. But here we have Lynn. And I feel like Lynn's interesting in that there were definitely points where she definitely played effectively, like the week where she was on the block in week 2. She's able to convince Jess to not target Gino. And obviously, there were definitely points where she was able to position herself accordingly. The issue is that there were other points where I feel like she wasn't really playing the game. She obviously had some perception issues early on, especially once she got into a showmance with Gino. And obviously, by the end, she was in a pretty bad position where once Gino goes, she essentially has to win out from that point, which again is she is partly helped by the fact that there's a triple. But again, she would have gone home had she not won the veto or the HOH in that week, so that's not particularly great. And then obviously in the final five, we have her and Josh as the options there, especially once the HOH and VO results are made, leaving the decision in the hands of Kevin and Helena. And I do think that JC Lynn does okay work with trying to get Kevin and Helena to get to keep her. And I feel like there were definitely points during that week where Kevin and Helena believed that it was better to keep JC Lynn in the game. She also makes a final 2 deal with Kevin to try to convince him. But obviously, by the end, they ultimately decided to keep Josh around, which, to be fair, was in their best interest. But obviously, it's not great that JC wasn't able to keep them around. But obviously, there's also the fact that JC Lynn probably wins if she gets to the end. I feel like, while she wasn't the biggest jury threat on the world, I feel like if she won out from the final 8 on, that people probably would have respected her, and she probably would have gotten like a lot of jury votes in that case. So I think there are definitely plenty of pros to JC Lynn's game. There are definitely points where she did impress me with some of the gameplay she was displaying. It's just that there were other points where I felt like she was kind of poorly positioned. And then obviously by the end, especially when Gino went home, especially the way that he did, she essentially had to win out. And obviously, even then, there was definitely a possibility she could have stayed, but obviously it didn't work. So again, it was still a very impressive game and a big reason I have her this high. But I feel like the top 3 people each had bigger pros to their game. So because of that, I had her here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3. And this is sort of an interesting person to talk about as well, as I feel like they dominated a decent chunk of the game. However, the biggest problem is that I don't think they really win a jury vote. But here we have Helena. And I think Helena played a pretty impressive game for the most part, sort of alongside Kevin for a lot of it. And obviously was a key figure in that alliance there. You know, while she wasn't in the core early on, like she was again somewhat in a solid spot. I mean, again, no one was targeting her per se, but I also feel like she wasn't playing as actively as say Summer or Tanisha were. I feel like she was very much someone that was sort of floating around a bit, but eventually she finds her place with Kevin. And from that point on, they were able to build a power structure and able to run the game together. And obviously, she had a final 2 deal with Kevin that again, he would have honored. However, the biggest problem with Helena is that she doesn't win a jury vote in really any scenario. I mean, she loses to Kevin, of course, but she also loses to Josh. She loses to JC Lynn. She even loses to Betty, I believe. So that's not particularly great. I mean, she really had a pretty bad perception out there. A lot of it was due to her own doing, where she allowed herself to be perceived as Kevin's follower. I mean, she would tell people that she would only do stuff that Kevin wanted. Like she told that to JC Lynn and to Betty during the final 5, which again is a pretty good microcosm of how the jury perceived her. And again, it's not great that she doesn't win a jury vote really in any scenario, but it's the fact that she was able to run the game alongside Kevin for a lot of it. And obviously the fact that she had a decent amount of control is a big reason I have her this high. However, again, there are still the knocks. Like, again, her jury management was pretty bad. And obviously the final 4 as well, where Josh had a complete misread on her, thinking that she was a much bigger threat than what she actually was, and obviously voted her out. So obviously the fact that she was not going to win the game really in any scenario, but is still taken out for being perceived as a threat isn't ideal. And those are big reasons that I have to leave her here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and obviously it is the final 2 of the season. It's just a matter of the order, and honestly, the order is pretty clear to me. Then at number 2, we have the runner-up of the season. We have Josh. And Josh is a very weird player to discuss, as on one hand, again, he, similar to Helena, he and Kevin, they are in the majority for a lot of that mid-game. And obviously by the end, he is someone who seems to be in a pretty good spot to get towards the end of the game. However, there are obviously other issues with this game. Like early on, like while he is sort of in a similar spot to like Tanisha or Jay in that he is able to build a lot of decent social bonds, he never really talks game with a lot of people, which definitely sketches some people out. There are people that don't feel like Josh is in their corner per se, which definitely makes it hard for him to integrate strategically. He is obviously on the block early on, which isn't great, but again, he probably stays over Jay, so that's something at least. And then obviously later on, we see him start to be pulled into a new alliance, particularly with Summer and Tanisha, but obviously later with Kevin and Helena. And from that point on, they become the crash test dummies, which are able to run a lot of this game. And again, you do have to credit Josh for being able to get into that group that's able to ride it all the way to the end. However, there are obviously some other issues, like the fact that he does allow Kevin to control a lot of his game. That's not particularly great. Although I feel like he did have more agency than Helena, so that's something at least. Obviously, he wins HOH during the triple eviction, and obviously he burns both Betty and Summer during that, to where he definitely loses Summer's vote through that. And obviously, he could have lost Betty's jury vote as well if she wasn't so loyal to him. So there's that. Obviously, it's a really bad display of jury management there. And then from that point on, like, he's in a bad spot at the final 5, where, again, he did come into the week with Lynn as the clear target there, but once it became apparent that he was starting to distance himself from Kevin and Helena, once it seemed like he was starting to pick up on his game, we saw Kevin and Helena literally the deciding votes there, having to choose between him and Lynn, and there was definitely a point where he could have been evicted there, but obviously by the end of the week, they choose to save Josh. Final 4, he's able to win both HOH and veto, but despite literally getting information suggesting Kevin and Helena aren't loyal to him, he is able to get back with Kevin. He allows Kevin to get back with him. And a lot of this is due to this misconception he has where he thinks Kevin is a GOAT and will probably lose to him, which is obviously anything but true. And obviously, we see him vote to evict Betty or Helena at the final 4, allowing Helena to go out there, which again is a misread. He did it because he felt like Helena was the biggest threat, which in reality, Helena was the smallest threat and probably one of the few people that he wins against in this endgame, where again, it is debatable between him and Betty. It would have been very close, but obviously it would have been very blatant against Helena. And then we get to the final 3, where he wins final HOH, has to make a decision, and he obviously makes the wrong decision in voting out Betty over Kevin. And again, I mean, some of that is excusable in that there is a debate that he could lose against Betty, but he literally does this under the assumption that he's going to win against Kevin, which obviously doesn't happen. He loses in pretty overwhelming fashion there. So again, it's a pretty rough end game, a pretty rough beginning game, but obviously he has a relatively strong mid game. He's sort of a second command for a lot of it, while still having some connections outside the Crash Test Dummies. However, it's the fact that he makes some pretty questionable decisions, and obviously the fact that he ultimately makes the incorrect decision at the end, that leads me to leave him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe played the best game in BB Can 10 is the winner of the season, and here we have Kevin. And again, he played a very impressive game on the season, though not without its flaws. I mean, he obviously is on the block week 1, and I believe he is the only person in the history of not only Big Brother Canada, but also Big Brother US to win the game after surviving eviction night week 1. Obviously, we had Steve from BB17 be nominated week 1, but he won the veto. So that means Kevin is the only one to be on the block week 1 on eviction night. And I believe he's also the only winner in BB Can history, at least, to have votes cast against him. So there's that to consider. And he's also the first winner, again, across BBUS and BB Can since Dr. Will to win the game, despite not winning any competitions, or specifically not winning any HOHs throughout the season. I believe he won a veto, but he is the first winner since Dr. Will to win the game, despite not winning a single HOH. And the fact that he was able to have so much control over the game, despite not winning HOH at any point, is pretty impressive. Again, he is obviously on the outs early on, and obviously he was left out the Savage 7, but once that blows up, he is able to get some work done. Like, in order, is able to pick up the scraps. He obviously connects a lot with Helena, connects a lot with Betty, and a lot of the people on the outside there. Obviously, during the Jess HOH, he is a key figure in that, in order to get them to put up Tanisha, and he's even able to get the votes set up so that there are essentially two sides to the house. He's able to manufacture these two sides with him on one side and the Herman and remnants of the Savage 7 on the other side. He's able to manufacture that, all while Herman never really picks up on his game. And really, that's sort of a boon, but also a worry about his game, and that is that there was definitely a decent point in the game where he was seen as less of a threat and probably would not have won a jury vote in most situations. I mean, Herman didn't really respect his game on his way out, thinking that he wasn't involved with it. However, we see later on as more people come into the jury, particularly Marty, obviously they're able to share Kevin's game, and from that point on, they're much higher on him. So again, that is somewhat effective jury management, somewhat effective threat perception on Kevin's end, where he was able to be seen as not a non-threat within the game, but then obviously he still had people that were willing to advocate for him after getting out of the game. So that's something at least, again, is able to hold control for a lot of the game, is able to manipulate Marty during the Gino week to not put him up as a replacement, despite that being a very likely possibility, and is able to get Gino out, which again did involve a bit of luck. I mean, as obviously involved drawing gummy bears, but once Gino drew the red gummy bear, he was able to get the votes onto Gino, resulting in that eviction taking place. And obviously, at the final 8, Josh wins HOH, one of his better case scenarios. And despite Betty and Summer being two of Josh's closer allies, he is so close to Kevin, so loyal to Kevin, that he never puts him off on the block during the triple eviction, which is very impressive, especially as we see him not only burn Summer, but gets Betty very upset at him, Josh. But again, none of the blood is on Kevin's hands. At the final 5, he is in a power position to where a lot of people are going to take him to the end. And obviously, once the video results play out, he and Helena are the deciding votes there, where they have to choose between Josh and JC Lynn. Obviously, he does make a mistake there in that he keeps waffling back and forth. And all along the way, like Josh and Bet are able to reconnect and are able to talk about how Kevin's been running the game. And that was definitely an issue on his end. And obviously, the fact that he keeps Josh after that point is a bit of a worry. However, again, he does effective work afterwards in getting Josh back on his side. And we see that play out where at the final 4, he literally evicts Helena over him. Again, under the assumption that Kevin was less of a jury threat than Helena, which obviously is not true. And at the final 3, he is able to get Josh to remain loyal to him, is able to convince him to take him to the end over Betty, and obviously he demolishes him in the jury vote. So again, a lot of that comes from his relationship with Josh throughout the game, but also him managing his threat level so that Josh actually believed that by taking Kevin to the end, he would win, whereas he would lose against both Helena and Betty, though I did talk about that scenario earlier. So again, it's a very impressive game, and despite him never winning an HOH throughout the season, and despite him having a bit of a rough start, he's able to exercise a lot of control during the game. He's able to get out a lot of his big threats, is able to manage his threat level, which again could have been an issue had there not been people willing to advocate for him, but he is able to have people like Marty come out of the game thinking very favorably of him, and is able to convince the jury to say that he's played a big game, which he did. He did play a big game, and he really had a lot of control throughout a lot of it, and he's definitely one of the more impressive winners in the history of Big Brother, and a big reason that he's number 1 on this player ranking. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video, along with my coverage of Big Brother Canada 10. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. And moving forward, again, I'll be doing more of this coverage. I mean, obviously the circle is still happening, so I have coverage for that. Survivor 42 is still happening, so I'll also have coverage for that. And I do plan to have more general videos coming out soon, especially as we're heading into a bit of a slow period. It's sort of crazy how the last couple of months have been pretty chaotic, but I am trying to get out more general stuff. So stay tuned for all that. But for now, that is the video. See ya.